Some people are afraid of dead people, but not being a believer myself, I never had to worry about being surrounded by the dead constantly. I was more worried about the strange people that would come around trying a good deal of trickery to get themselves a dead body. I have heard of bodies going missing only to appear in an abandoned house or in the woods. Sometimes I was called to corroborate if it was a previous dead body stolen from our facility. As strange as it may sound, dead bodies are a very profitable business. That's why it was so strange when she appeared on the floor that night. She must have paid the guards to get in, and I would usually just call security again, but as soon as she entered the door I was struck by her. Now it is hard to explain why, but she looked so fragile yet so confident in herself. She wasn't the most attractive woman you can think of, yet there was something in the way she walked or moved or the way her eyes looked at me that I couldn't take my eyes off her. Also, she immediately smiled, which made me even more harmless against her. I let her into my office, and the closer she got to me, the more I was willing to do anything she said. I felt a strange yellow light coming out of her and pulling me in, and there was this strange melodic sound filling the room. I still remember how she turned her head to me, and without saying anything I knew she wanted me to come to her. It was like we had some sort of telepathic communication. The closer I got to her I could see this yellow bright light coming from her getting brighter and feeding me this warmth all over my body. Her big eyes stared at me while she touched me for the first time. She held my hand and told me that she was looking for a friend of her that she needed to find and carry it to some other place. I immediately reacted by going through each of the dead bodies, showing her what was available so she could take anyone she wanted. She would settle on one that had recently arrived. He was a male body of around 45 years old that was intact because according to my autopsy he had a heart attack. I put the body in a bag and carried it onto the morgue van. Something happened to me at that point. I remember that my body hesitated to continue and decided it was time to stay. This moment of clarity showed me that nothing that was happening made any sense, but she quickly persuaded me to come along. For her it was as simple as giving me the right look for me to obey. I still remember I had never felt so pleasantly excited in my life, so I drove them for some time, arriving without receiving any directions at a place I did not know existed before. We arrived in this big house where everything around was dark because the other houses around were empty, so there was no light in the area except for the moonlight. It felt like it was just an abandoned house that needed urgent restoration work like painting or gardening, but without hesitation, I went in. I took the body in as instructed, then I felt the instructions to lie next to the dead body. By now she was laughing, and it was such a precious sound coming from her that I would have done anything in an attempt to continue from happening in my presence. There on the floor I felt my body getting tougher and tougher until I couldn't move it anymore, and my eyes were getting more and more difficult to keep open. I could still hear her laugh, but I didn't understand where I was and what was happening to me, why I couldn't move. Then the laugh turned into the most horrendous noise I have ever heard. After that I passed out. I then felt how everything went black and I could only hear someone walking at a fast pace, more like jogging. I saw this slim figure coming to me. He stopped and looked at me, but it was so dark he just looked like a shadow of a human. His arms and legs were longer than a normal person, and he just continued on his way until it disappeared on my back. I went forward until I saw this small light that kept getting bigger the closer I got until it filled me completely. When I woke up, I felt scared. I couldn't move, but I could feel I was being dragged through the floor. The only thing I could see was this blurry image of someone next to me moving my body down some stairs. I tried to move, but my body was too heavy, and even with all my effort I couldn't move a muscle. The lights were going out, so I realized that I was being dragged down to a basement. There in the dark I felt how my hand got locked to a steel pipe with a chain locked. Some minutes later I still couldn't move, but my vision became more and more clearer, and now I could see the face of the person that brought me down here. It was an old woman that seemed to have some sort of skin rash all around his cheeks and neck. I couldn't talk and she didn't seem interested in me. I saw her look at me, but with such disinterest, almost like if I was not even there. She left me in the floor and I saw how she went away. Minutes later she returned dragging this other unconscious body down the basement stairs, and I could see that he was awake, because as soon as they were down she left him alone and he moved in a very unstable way, like almost falling down on every step, and working hard on trying to get control of his mass. He then went to the other side of the room and sat down. I couldn't see him clearly since the only illumination we had here was coming from a candle, but I felt his stare looking at me. He would have from time to time full body spasms that he tried to control with even more violent movements, sometimes hitting himself against the wall. By then I could barely move and stay awake, but felt heaviness all over my body like it wanted to shut down. His face has started to bleed, because of him hitting himself, but he seemed like he did not felt any pain. It looked more like a rabid dog trying to beat his disease out until it couldn't fight the heaviness anymore and fell to the floor. I stayed awake for some seconds, enough to see how he was standing up and coming my way, and I felt scared and helpless like I had never felt before, and I wished then I just wouldn't wake up again. From the reduced vision I had, I could see this dark slim figure standing next to him, looking like he was supervising his movements. When I woke up I didn't know how much time had passed. I looked around and the basement was dark and felt empty. I could move and I tried and was able to make sounds with my mouth. I then noticed my voice sounded weird, but at least I could make noises now. Then I heard noises coming from the up floor. It was someone walking fast in the direction of the basement door, and then I could hear the noise from a door opening and the light came in illuminating the stairs. Next I heard him walking fast coming down, and he was moving faster than before and more in control, not like a human yet, but more like a big animal learning to control his body. He came running to me and I didn't know if he was going to attack me, because of the force he came to me, but he stopped just in front of me. Then I was able to make a sentence and asked him if he could please release me. He didn't answer, he just stood there. It was too dark to see any details, so I asked for water but got no response. Later that day he came down again and had a bag of raw chicken that he threw at me, but even if I wanted to I couldn't take it because my hands were tied down. He saw this and got closer to me. I could only say please, please, please in a quiet voice, not even knowing what was happening. To me, he took a piece of raw chicken and brought it closer to my face to try to force it into my mouth, and with his other hand he took another piece and started to eat it himself. Blood and transparent slime liquid started to come out of his mouth, dropping into his chin. He continued to bring the other piece into my mouth but I kept rejecting it. He finally got away from me, and took the bag and sat down on the floor where he continued eating, chopping all that raw white meat with his teeth, and blood coming down from his hands. More blood started to come out, and I saw how he had started to bite and took pieces from his own hands. It seemed like even pain was something he wanted to experiment with, so he bit even harder into his hand, into his own flesh. All the time he was staring at me, and he tried to also speak but he was only able to make noises. Sometimes he looked amicable and others he turned violent. It felt like days had passed. It was hard to tell since it was all dark in the basement. I could hear him upstairs walking, and falling down constantly, and I could hear him making loud noises, like an animal trying to learn to communicate. Now there was a terrible smell growing in the basement. It was like food going bad, and God knows what things were down here with me. I then heard him walking slowly until the basement door opened, and he was walking like more in control of his body, and his pants and shirt were full of food or blood. I noticed he was chewing again a raw piece of meat. It seemed like a corpse of something that I couldn't figure out what it was. He took a piece of it and threw it my way, and I was hungry but couldn't even imagine eating such a thing. I saw him smile for the first time, and went back to the wall to continue eating. He sat down on the floor. The basement door was left open, and I could clearly see his hands and teeth devouring, and after a closer look I started to clearly see his face, and I couldn't comprehend it at first, but it was so clear there in front of me, that I had no doubt of what I was seeing. I felt for a moment like I was going to lose my mind trying to understand what was happening, and this wave of shock started to affect my whole body, causing my muscles to get all tense. He was there in front of me, but it was in my body, and it was my face, and the awful smell now made sense. I was the corpse. She had taken my body. When I saw the open door of the basement, I put all my effort and was able to release myself, and tried to run away as fast as I could. I knew this was my opportunity, and like a loose animal, I stomped my way out of the basement feeling I was going to fall down on every step I took. I then crossed through the basement door, and desperately started to look for a door or a window, anything where I could exit this nightmare. It was all closed down from all three sides, so I took the only open space in the corridor. I felt the vulnerability of my situation, not knowing what could appear on any turn in this house. I felt trapped, as if I was going through a maze in no direction, but just trying to move away as fast as I could. The noises came from down the basement, and I assumed the creature was now coming to get me. Every time I blinked I could see this slim black figure in front of me, but when I opened my eyes there was nothing there. I thought it was because of my desperation to get out of that place, as I knew I would only have this opportunity. I saw light coming from somewhere, daylight I haven't seen in God knows how long. I imagined a blue sky waiting for me, and that gave me extra strength to continue running away. I crossed what it seemed like a living room, and in a corner, there she was. The black slim figure, with his old and decrepit skin that looked like it was falling off of her, and almost showing her bones, her face looked more like a corpse, with her eyes so submerged into the cranium, and this long and misshapen nose. She turned to face me, and for a second looked surprised, but then stopped, and started to laugh hysterically. That horrible noise I have heard before. I didn't have much time left, and I saw a door on the next room, and ran for it, and finally I exited the house. It was the clear blue sky I had imagined, and I stopped and stood just a few steps out. Like if my mind wanted to affirm if what I was looking at was real, and then I saw the door opening again, and this beautiful woman came out and standed out the door. After her my body came out and stood next to her. "He is mine, he is mine, he is mine," shouted her in a mocking tone and went back in. I hesitated on what to do, but realized I was lost. I immediately got as far away as I could from that place. I can feel the rotting skin in my body getting worse and worse every hour. I looked at myself only once and realized my end was close, and there is no point in trying to do anything else. I live now in the landfill out of the city where no one can see me, just waiting for this body to die again.